This is week 5 of the first semester in biology, and today we're going to move into a unit of 2 weeks where we are covering the fundamentals of ecology. As I told you last week, in this section I'm going to have a guest lecturer, Kenton Senna, to come in and talk to you about his experiences and his understanding of ecology. He is an expert in ecology and can lend a great deal as supplemental material to the textbook and these videos. I will emphasize that all quiz and test material will come from the slides, from the reading, etc., and other things that he may talk about will not be part of the test. So in order to introduce you to ecology, we have to go over some principal terms. The first of these terms is the term ecology. Ecology is the study of how living things interact with one another and also interact with their environment. And within that, we have to talk about a habitat. The word habitat in the context of ecology means an organism's environment or home, that is, where the organism naturally lives. So, for example, these 2 deer that you see on the left here, on the right, they live in this wooded area with lots of grass. This could probably be a scene from Montana or Canada or any of a number of places in Europe or South America for that matter. One thing that's important to understand is you really can't understand an organism completely until you understand its interaction with its habitat. So with that introduction of terminology, let's move on to some more specific terminology. The first of these is something known as the levels of ecology. Now, the levels of ecology simply mean that God has put this planet together, and you can start from a wide-angle lens to see all of what God has created in the earth. And then you can cone down on that and get closer and closer with more and more specific areas of the planet, and those would be the levels of ecology. So the widest level, the widest possible level, is known as the biosphere. And the biosphere is the thin layer of the Earth's surface where life exists. And it really is a thin layer. I mean, if you look at the Earth in general and you drill down into the Earth, you don't have to drill very far before essentially there's no more life. What you run into is essentially rock. And so the biosphere is a very thin layer, and included in that, well, before I talk about what's included in that, the biosphere is actually divided up into geographical regions. And those geographical regions are predominantly defined by the life that dominates the particular area. Some examples of biomes include the desert regions, the prairies, and we will talk more specifically about different biomes. Another biome that I think you'd recognize is the Arctic tundra, where everything is defined by what exists in that area. Now, if we look at the biosphere can be divided up into 3 groups or 3 areas. The atmosphere, which is the air around the earth, the lithosphere, which is the land or the land masses, and the hydrosphere, which is water. And you probably know this, but somewhere around 65 to 70% of the biosphere is water. The rest is land. And the other thing that I'll point out, as I said before, that the biomes are generally defined by what's known as the climax vegetation. And climax vegetation is that species of plants that predominate in a particular area or geographic region. And again, if you think of the Arctic tundra, there's virtually no plants. It's all ice and snow. If you think of the desert, you think of cactus and a few scrubs, etc. If you think of a prairie, which is, let's say, western United States, it's predominantly grasslands. If you think of, say, the northern part of the south, where the pine trees predominate, you have another biome in that area. And so there's a lot of different areas that have predominant types of vegetation, which we will talk about in more detail in a future part of this lecture. Now, as you cone down from the biome, the next area that we talk about is called an ecosystem. So within a particular biome is an ecosystem. And the ecosystems are smaller natural areas that have their own specific environmental conditions. And this includes both the plants that they have as well as the animals. And the smaller areas, the largest of these smaller areas are the terrestrial and the aquatic. The terrestrial being the land within a particular biome, and the aquatic being the water that may or may not be present in that particular biome. And as we talk some more about the levels of ecology, we talked about the biosphere, working down to biome, working down to ecosystem, and then inside an ecosystem is a community. And a community is all the living things that exist within an ecosystem. So within that community is a population. So you have an ecosystem that has a community of organisms. Within the community of organisms is the populations that exist. And so that's all the organisms that are of the same species within the community. And then last but not least are the organisms themselves, which are the individual aspects of the population. So if you talk about the levels of ecology, the smallest living unit within the biosphere, within any particular biome, within any particular ecosystem, is the organism itself. Now, one thing about ecosystems is in order to support life, it has to be able to withstand stress and change. And if stress and change comes, it has to be able to recover from that stress or change. And that ability to withstand stress or change and recover from stress or change is called stability. If the ecosystem is not stable, then the plants and animals are both at risk of not surviving. This pyramid, the purpose of this pyramid is to just re-emphasize the various areas or organizational levels within the ecology. As I said before, you start at the outermost part, which is the biosphere, and that includes the whole earth and everywhere around the earth where plants and animals can live. Within the biosphere are biomes, which are geographic areas that have specific plant and animal life. The ecosystem is within the biome, and that's the areas, the smaller areas where animals and plants may live. And then we have the community, which is all the living things within an ecosystem. The population, which is all the living things of the same species within the community. And then last but not least is the organism, which is the single individual within the population. Now, what are some influences in the ecosystem? And what do I mean by influences? Well, influences are the external factors, both living and not living, that can have an impact or cause a change, which the ecosystem will try to resist or withstand and recover from. So all of these influences have some impact on the animal and plant life that live within an ecosystem. And the most important aspect is the ability of the ecosystem to support a population. And the maximum population size that can be supported is called the carrying capacity within the ecosystem. And for each you'll see that this is defined by the word population, which is the species specific. So, for example, a particular ecosystem, you might say, what is the carrying capacity for wolves within this ecosystem? A wolf being a particular population. And that may be different. The carrying capacity for an ecosystem for wolves may be different than the carrying capacity for, say, the the moles that live in the ground. And there would be another carrying capacity for that group. And so an ecosystem has a carrying capacity for all the various species that are in it, and that is important to tell what not only the different types of populations, but the size of these populations as they exist. Now, if a population overgrows the carrying capacity or exceeds the carrying capacity, then it's called overpopulation. And there are examples where this has occurred because of things that man have done in the past. One example that I can think of is out west. There was a time when farmers were kind of getting fed up with the wolves in their setting, and so the government made it okay to kill wolves. And unfortunately, and we'll talk about this when we talk about food chains and food webs, but unfortunately they killed too many wolves. So what happened was all of a sudden the deer didn't have any natural enemies. And the deer overpopulated the ecosystem that they were in. And then the deer started dying off, and it caused a real problem. The other thing that happened was the deer began to overeat the vegetation, and it caused certain aspects of the vegetation to die because of too many deer. And so overpopulation can occur, and many times when man intervenes to try to fix one problem or another, they can cause a problem that they don't even realize they're causing. Now, within the ecosystem, there's something known as biodiversity, and this is, as it says here, the number and variety of living species within an ecosystem. Some areas have exceedingly diverse populations. Others have a much more limited, because the other factors are more severe. And we're going to talk about that here in just a minute as we talk about abiotic factors. Abiotic, as the Latin interpretation of this would lead you to believe, means factors that are not living. And these factors include radiation, and the principal form of radiation is radiation from the sun in an ecosystem. Temperature, which we all know is the height of warmth within an ecosystem. You know that you may or may not know the physics definition of temperature is the average kinetic energy of all the molecules in the atmosphere in that area. The temperature is exceedingly important for the chemical reactions that occur, and therefore it influences all plant and animal life as well as their activity. Water being the major component of all life. A human body is 65% water, and so water obviously is very important. And it's also important in the transportation of nutrients, in the fact that the rain will have nutrients in it within the water, the streams will have nutrients in it within the water. As water runs off the hills from a rainstorm, it brings nutrients down into the rivers, etc. Atmosphere, which includes primarily oxygen, nitrogen, and carbon dioxide. These are probably the three most important elements or molecules in the atmosphere in terms of human life. Wind, which provides for the movement of rainfall and change in temperatures. It also provides a lot of the changes in weather that we see, which is extremely important for the plant and animal life. And then lastly, soil. Soil impacts the kind of plants, and as we'll move forward, you'll see that plant life is exceedingly important because it is what captures the energy from the sun and brings it and makes it available to the rest of living things. Now, when we talk about abiotic factors, there's a range of values of any particular factor that is tolerated. In other words, an organism can still survive within this range of values. A good example would be temperature. Most organisms can tolerate a temperature range of somewhere between 32 degrees Fahrenheit and 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, within that tolerance range is what's known as the optimum range, the range in which the organisms flourish and do the best. And that now that varies. I said 32 to 100 for most animals. When you start talking about optimum ranges, different species of animal will have different optimals. Any value of any of these various factors, whether it be temperature, oxygen, carbon dioxide, water, any value that's outside the tolerance range can be a limiting factor for that organism. A good example would be too little water and the effect that would have on the plant life in the habitat. If you have too little water, then the habitat will suffer from, the plants in that habitat will suffer from that lack of water. Then also there are the biotic factors that impact what goes on in the habitat. And, obviously, and we will talk about this extensively, predators within the habitat, the herbivores within the habitat, these also influence what happens within the ecosystem. Now, an ecosystem is in dynamic equilibrium. And what that means is that at any particular time, the level of water, the level of temperature, the oxygen value can be changing. However, it changes back and forth, and the ecosystem adjusts to that and changes it back to the mean, and so that the ecosystem always remains the same. And this concept is very similar to the concept of homeostasis, which a living body or organism will always try to keep its various factors within the body itself at a particular level. And similarly, the ecosystem will move and do things in order to keep things the same. And so it's in dynamic equilibrium. Now, the purpose of this slide is simply to review these factors again. As I said, abiotic factors are non-living components that impact the ecosystem. And the 6 abiotic factors that are important are wind, sunlight, which is the source of radiation, soil, temperature, atmosphere, which carries important molecules like nitrogen, oxygen, and carbon dioxide, and then lastly, water.